Hey everyone! Welcome to episode 11 of my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series. This month, I'm joined by my friends Kim Ferguson, May Flom, who is Kraft with May on Instagram and on YouTube, as well as Natasha Pidlick, who is Crafting Compassionate Love on both YouTube and Instagram, and we're going to be sharing some different surfaces that you can stamp on besides white cardstock. Before I dive into this month's video, here's a look at the posts that were shared using the hashtag SYS scrapbooking last month. So last month's videos were all about using tag, frame, and label stamps, and Ty Cortez, who was one of my guest contributors, shared this super cute spread using some label stamps from Ellie Studio to document in her memory planner. I just love the gradient of colors she created across her page, so fun and vibrant. She also shared this fun interactive spread where she created some flip-up tags using some stamps from Heidi Swap and Carrie Bradford. And I love how she was able to include so many photos and stories on this one page. Marie Hurst was my other guest contributor last month, and she used a stamp set with some tabs from Ellie Studio to create a bright and vibrant watercolor background for her page. I still can't believe she cut out each and every one of these tabs. It must have taken such a long time to do, but her spread turned out amazing. For my layouts last month, I shared how to create some interactive flip-ups using a frame stamp from Studio Calico to create this page in my Seattle and Portland trip album. This idea is a bit similar to the layout that Ty created using the tags, but I chose to heat emboss mine in white on top of some colored cardstock to make these frames really pop for my page. And for my second layout, I shared a quick hack for how to stamp and die cut lots and lots of labels really quickly using a stamp and die set from Ellie's Studio to create this currently page in my Life Crafted album. So make sure you check out all those videos in my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking playlist if you missed any last month. Tiffany Mitchell shared this gorgeous page over on Instagram featuring some stamps from Ellie Edwards to create this multi-layered layout. I love that she even stuck with our theme of tags and frames this month and used her stamps to fill in some tags to decorate her spread. Just a reminder that if you'd like to share your layouts on Instagram inspired by our Stretch Your Stamps videos, make sure to use the hashtag SYS scrapbooking, and I'll pick out a few to feature in my video next month. For this month's theme, we're doing something a bit different, and instead of focusing on a particular type of stamp, we're going to be stamping on surfaces other than white cardstock. I think a lot of us are quite comfortable stamping on paper and cardstock, but there are so many other surfaces we could be stamping on too, and in my video, I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks for stamping on vellum and cork. For my first layout, I'm using the Everyday Explorers Food Coma stamp set, and I'm going to be creating little vellum overlays on top of my photos to document some of the best foods that we had during our Seattle and Portland trip. So I've printed out 8 photos at 2 by 2 inches, and I've cut out 8 pieces of vellum at 2 inches wide by 2.5 inches tall. The extra ½ inch on the top is what I'm going to use to adhere the vellum to the back and create a little flap. I'll leave a link to the vellum that I most commonly use down in the description box below, but I pretty much just went through my stash of scrap pieces of vellum and cut out a few pieces that were all the same size. I'm going to stamp 3 of these stamps onto each of these vellum pieces, an inner icon or word phrase that corresponds with each of my photos, then an outer circle with words going all the way around, then a larger circle around that, which I'm just stamping down now. The first tip that I have when stamping on slick, non-porous surfaces such as vellum or acetate is that you might want to use a stamp positioning tool to stamp your images. When you stamp down on slippery surfaces, the ink sometimes can make your stamp slide around on the surface you're trying to stamp on, so these stamp positioners help to prevent that from happening. If you don't have a stamp positioning tool, just make sure that you're applying even pressure all the way down on your stamp and not pushing your stamp in any one angle. Also, stamp positioning tools are great if you need to restamp an image again, for example, if you didn't get a clear impression the first time. Vellum isn't quite as slippery as acetate though, and I usually don't have much problem stamping on it, so you'll see me use the stamp positioning tool for this first part where I'm just stamping the larger circle repeatedly on all of these vellum pieces, and then I'll be using just a regular stamping block for the individual stamps that I'm going to be stamping inside this circle. My second tip for stamping on slick surfaces is to use the right type of ink to stamp with. And this tip applies to any non-porous surfaces like vellum, acetate, Yupo paper, glossy photo paper, or even things like glass and plastic. For these surfaces, you want to avoid using any water-based inks. Those are usually dye inks or hybrid inks. And that's because water-based inks tend to bead up on the surfaces of non-porous substrates, like water would bead up on a sheet of glass. So no matter how long you leave those out to dry, they won't really dry permanently onto your surface. The types of inks that can be used on non-porous surfaces are solvent or alcohol-based inks, like StazOn, or oil-based inks, like these Ranger archival inks. Now, I usually prefer to use my archival inks instead of StazOn, and that's because I find that StazOn kind of has like a sharp chemical smell. And just another note too is that you can use pigment inks on non-porous surfaces as well. Some examples of those are VersaFine and the Ali Edwards ink pads. But I find that those don't really dry as fast as the StazOn or archival inks do, so I don't use those ones as often either. And my last tip for stamping on smooth surfaces is to give your inks a bit of time to dry. I find that for archival inks, it's usually pretty easy to tell when the ink has dried because when it's still wet, it looks a bit shiny on the surface. And I don't find that it takes too long to dry, but that might be something that you want to take into account if you're trying to make a quick layout. Here I have all of my vellum pieces ready to go, and I'm just going to layer each of these vellum pieces on top of the corresponding photo, then fold the top edge of the vellum over the top edge of my photo and stick that down by running my Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape runner on the top edge of the back of my photos. Once that's done, I'm arranging my squares onto some pattern paper from the Travelogue collection from Citrus Twist Kits, making sure that all of the food photos appear in chronological order, and this is going to be the right page of my layout in my Life Crafted album. For the left side of the page, I've used the Citrus Twist Kits Clip Notes cut file to cut out this clipboard, and I'm going to trim off the inner edge of this clipboard because I'm going to be using this to create an interactive element. I'm using some gold foiled cardstock. This is, I think, rose gold foiled cardstock to back the metal clip part of the cut file, because some of the travel ephemera pieces that I'm going to be including on this layout have some rose gold foiling details as well. And I did save the fallout piece from that clip to adhere the hole in the clip and that extra line detail into place as well. As usual for backing my cut files, I'm using the fine pen tip of my Zig 2-way glue pen to apply some adhesive to the back of the cut file, then sticking it down onto my cardstock, and then using some fussy cutting scissors to trim around the cut file before the adhesive dries up completely. Once that's done, I'm adhering my clipboard onto some Kraft cardstock to make it look more like a clipboard. And this part is off camera, unfortunately, but I'm just using a craft knife and my self-healing mat to cut around the bottom of that clip so that I can slide a couple of pieces of paper underneath. Because the clipboard doesn't take up the whole Life Crafted album page, I'm going to adhere this clipboard onto some more pattern paper from the Travelogue collection, and I glued this down at a bit of an angle to make it look more organic, kind of like a waiter just slid this into my view with some receipts clipped into it. but instead of receipts, I have a postcard that I saved from a cafe that we visited, a drink card from the Starbucks roastery, and a journaling card from Citrus Twist Kit's Travelog digital journal cards. I just typed up each of the different foods onto the journaling card before I printed it out. And in the end, I did decide to adhere the journaling card onto the back of the postcard just so that there aren't too many pieces of paper flopping around in that clipboard that could potentially get lost. So here's a final look at the layout with some close-up photos. Vellum is probably one of my favorite surfaces to stamp on, and I love this technique of creating vellum overlays on top of my photos because it kind of softens up the look of the spread a bit and makes it look very cohesive, which is great especially when I have all these food photos that were taken in different types of lighting with different backgrounds, and some of the photos aren't really the best quality. For my next layout, I'm using the Getaway stamp set from Ali Edwards. This is from the travel release from last year, and I'm stamping on cork to create some custom embellishments for my page, documenting another part of my Seattle and Portland trip in my Life Crafted album. I'm using some self-adhesive cork sheets from Crafter's Companion. I just love this cork because it's quite thin, so it's easy to punch or die cut into different shapes. And I've even used my electronic cutting machine on these sheets before, and they cut just beautifully. For my stamping, I've purposely picked out sentiment stamps that have a bit of a bolder and larger font, because the surface of the cork isn't completely smooth, so the smaller, finer details tend to get lost in the texture of the cork. With this stamp set, I'm stamping the half circle stamp first. Then I'm going back in with some of the sentiment stamps and stamping some so that the text is on what would be the top half of the circle, and some so that the text would be on the bottom half of the circle. And after that, I'm using my 1 3/4 inch circle punch from EK Success to punch all of these out. I'm going to be using these cork pieces to decorate some photos that we took during our visit to the Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum. And the reason why I wanted to use these cork embellishments is because the photos are all very colorful, busy, and vibrant. So I didn't want to add too much color in the embellishments, and I thought the cork would be a perfect grounding element for these photos. Here I've printed out a full page photo that's going to go on the left side of my layout. Then I have 3 pages of photo collages, as well as a ticket stub from our visit. And I'm going to create a little undercut flip out with the ticket stub and 2 of the portrait-sized photos, and also a full page flip out with the 2 sets of 3 landscape photos. So just cutting my grid of 4 photos in half so that I can use 1/2 for my flip out. And before I start assembling this flip out, I'm going to adhere my cork embellishments into place first. So when I was choosing these photos that are the landscape orientation, I purposely left one of the 2 sides on each of these photos with a bit more empty space so that I'd have room for the cork embellishments. And I'm just going to center these along the edges of each of these photos with the text all facing to the right. And you can see here why I love these cork sheets so much. I just have to peel off the tape backing with my tweezers there, and they can just stick down onto my photo, and they have a good stick as well, so I know that they're not going to go anywhere. Now that I'm finished with my embellishments, I'm going to start assembling my flip out page. The 4 portrait-oriented photos are going to be at the very front of the page, and the 2 photos on the very right are going to flip open to reveal my ticket stub and some journaling that I'm going to add later on. So I'm trimming off the sides of my ticket stub so that it'll fit underneath the 2 photos. And because it's not as tall as the full height of my Life Crafted album page, I'm going to fill up the top and bottom with some pattern paper from Citrus Twist Kits. Then I'm going to create 2 hinges by cutting strips of paper at 1 inch wide by 8.5 inches tall, then scoring them in half at the 1/2 inch mark. Then I'm going to adhere these 2 hinges together using some 1/2 inch score tape. You should end up with 3 hinge flaps. The bottommost flap is going to get attached to the back of my bottommost photo collage. Then I'm going to attach the second photo collage to the bottom of the second flap so that I'll have a full page flip out. And then to the front side of that second photo collage, I'm going to attach 2 of the portrait-oriented photos along the left edge, and then my ticket stub and the patterned papers along the right edge. And that will cover up the middle flap of that hinge. And lastly, I'm going to attach the other 2 portrait-oriented photos over top of that topmost flap on the hinge to complete this flip-out assembly. Now, this flip-out doesn't lie completely flat, but I'm not too concerned about that. Usually the pages in my album are heavy enough that the flip-outs will eventually flatten out over time. Here you'll see that I've printed out my journaling onto some clear sticker paper, and that's just going to get adhered onto the back of that undercut photo flap. And I'm just going to burnish down with my Teflon bone folder so that the clear sticker paper is completely transparent. Lastly, to decorate the full page photo on the left side, I'm using the black chipboard alphabet stickers from the Ali Edwards Storytelling Basics collection to spell out the word Chihuly. And I have one leftover cork half circle that says loving that I'm going to adhere over my title as well. And here's a look at my completed layout. I love how the cork embellishments contrast with the bright colors of my spread, and I love that they don't add too much bulk to my already bulky album as well. I hope you enjoyed those tips and tricks for stamping on a variety of different surfaces. I would love to see what types of surfaces you've been inspired to stamp on as well. So don't forget to use the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking if you decide to try out any of these techniques, or any of the techniques shown in Kim, May, or Natasha's videos. I'll be sharing new videos from my Stretch Your Stamps Scrapbooking's video series on the second Saturday of each month, so make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel for more crafting inspiration. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching!